So let me take you through the roadmap quickly. But first, I just want to talk a little bit about how we got here over the last several years. I think the last time we had this meeting was almost 3 years ago. So we've done a lot of work since then. Essentially, if you look at Aerospike, we started with our strong consistency implementation in 2018. And we've also invested a lot of time and effort on ecosystem products. And you'll see some of it in pretty much every release we make these days. Additionally, we've worked on various storage and other enhancements like incorporating persistent memory, as well as various software-based things like all flash and so on, which I think are well deployed these days. We continue to improve the product. With Aerospike 5, we have the ability to handle global distributed transactions. So if you've heard of things like Spanner, for example, from Google, Aerospike can actually be run in a strongly consistent system with geographically distributed either across data centers or cloud regions or availability zones, while you are able to kind of trade off some level of write latency to preserve consistency and also very high availability when data centers go down and so on. So that's actually being deployed in a number of interbank money transfer transactions, for example. So, we've done a lot of other work in terms of asynchronous active-active systems, including XDR, which is used by a number of our customers, including many of you, to deal with things like CCPA, GDPR, and so on, where you can preserve data at various locations without getting into any of these compliance issues. So what we've also done, and you'll see that, I think Subbu talked about Presto. We've been working on various kinds of connectors so you can actually keep data in Aerospike and essentially are able to query it. So if you go over, look at the picture which is on the screen right now, this kind of gives you an overview of all of the areas where Aerospike can be used in the data center. We started off with edge systems, typically used by AdTech, for example, when we started like 12 and a half years ago, almost 13 years ago. We've since then expanded into a number of verticals, including financial services, gaming, telco, and so on. But what you see is Aerospike is not anymore used only on the edge. We can be used as a system of record, which can gather all of the real-time data in the enterprise and not only store it for a short amount of time. So you can store all of your data and have pretty much real-time or near real-time access to it without having to really spend an enormous amount of cost to store this and access it. What is the advantage of storing all of the data in a system of record? If you look at the way I've shown it here, these various clusters are connected through XDR, which is a cross-data center replication technology. But also, what we have is the ability to take this data from the system of record and in place access it in terms of query processing through other systems like Spark and Presto. And that's the kind of a philosophical thing about Aerospike is we are not trying to solve all the problems ourselves. We are leveraging other real-time systems so that we can improve the amount of performance you can get from Spark, managing data which is not just in DRAM, but also can be used in our hybrid memory architecture. So you can now solve much larger problems, not just with Aerospike in real time, but also with Spark and Presto and so on. Okay? I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Sorry. That's probably better. So that's kind of the key thing is to use existing data in Aerospike, and you store more of it, and then you can access it from other systems. We also have a number of connectors which enables Aerospike to communicate back and forth with other real-time systems using our change notification mechanisms, for example. What this allows you is you can use things like Kafka and Pulsar to move data to other real-time systems. And that's really important in terms of being a good citizen with real-time systems. Subbu already talked about 6.0. The one point I want to make is we have really revamped our secondary index implementation, but in terms of making it much faster for data access, but also essentially the amount of storage used to manage these index entries has been reduced to 1/3 of the previous size. Of course, you can ask me, why did you not do it in the first place? But that's kind of how this works. Is that when we did it first, maybe in 2013, we had a fairly good implementation, but I think we've learned a lot since then. We've improved it. And all of the work that I talked about in terms of using other systems like Spark and Presto means that we can now push down queries into Aerospike database through the secondary index and predicates and so on, and that enables you to manipulate a lot more data. So we're combining both parallelism and indexing, and you can't actually do better than that for data processing. We also added support for batch writes and so on, but overall, I think 6.0 we already talked about. The JSON API is something we now support natively and in some of the clients. More clients will support JSON as we go forward. The basic thing I want you to understand is it took us about 2 to 3 years of implementing various complex or collection-based data types like maps and lists and so on. And all of that work has now been leveraged to implement a JSON-based client to be able to access that. Internally, Aerospike stores these kind of collection data types using message pack. So we actually follow what I would call the more traditional database approach of implementing canonical data structures in the database and then mapping it to various programming languages and the environments with as little of an impedance mismatch as possible. There is one feature which is coming with Aerospike 6.1, which is deeper nesting of or deeper indexing into JSON objects. And once you have that, there is no reason not to use Aerospike as a document database for large-scale systems. So if you look at 6.1, the most important features for 6.1, which is going to come out in a quarter or so, is the warm start for secondary index. So once we have warm start, which means you can now have terabytes of data or tens of terabytes or maybe petabytes of data indexed with Aerospike, and you can actually warm start the node within a minute like you're used to doing today with primary indexes. And again, indexing of deeper nesting, which enable you to do a pure, full-fledged document application without any restrictions whatsoever. In terms of follow-on releases, we are working on a port to Graviton. This will appear on AWS, of course, but it's an ARM port, and there's a whole bunch of supporting work we have to do in addition to actually porting the server code, which we are working on. Additionally, I think as we go forward, we will be adding support for secondary indexes on Flash, as well as persistent memory. We're also working on, I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second, on point and time recovery. So if you look at, in general, a lot more future work is planned. And as you can imagine, right, we've been around for about 12.5 years. And every few years, I showed you like what happened since 2018. There's a whole bunch of work we have been doing. And if you kind of go back and compare with what I said we were going to do in 2019, I think we've done a lot of those things have been shipped. In fact, a lot more over the last few years than we expected to. And we're going to continue to accelerate some of that. We are working on multi-record transactions, rewriting UDFs. Every couple of years, we pick a topic and we basically rewrite it. The last couple of years has been secondary indexes. Before that, it was XDR and global transactions. Now it's going to be UDFs next, and so on and so forth. There's a whole bunch of work that we continue to do in the database. Especially, we are focusing a lot more on queries with the secondary index work, and we will essentially be able to do better query planning and so on, just like you would expect a database to do. On the operational side, we have actually done a lot of work on the Kubernetes operator. We have implemented, I think we are at version 2.0 of that. We continue to invest in it. It is going to be the basis of our database as a service, which I'll talk about in a second. So all of the work for Aerospike Connect is essentially enabling some of the core features that we're implementing in the database, including batch writes and secondary indexes and so on. We're also adding connectors from time to time. Essentially, Elasticsearch is something we're working on. We also released certain connectors like the event stream processing connector, which enables you to connect to arbitrary endpoints, for example, fairly easily. So if you look at the developer frameworks, I think Subbu mentioned that we have a better developer hub. We're going to continue to invest a lot of time and effort in making our product easier to be used by developers. As some of you have mentioned to me in some of the meetings we've had, our product is fairly challenging in some cases for developers to onboard themselves to Aerospike. So we hear you, and we're basically working on making sure that we can make serious progress in this area over the next 3 to 6 months, and then we will continue to improve that over the next couple of years. In terms of additional APIs, see, one of the things about learning new APIs is pretty much developers don't want to do it. I've been a developer myself, not that much in the last couple of years, but essentially one doesn't really want to learn new things as much as one wants to solve new problems, right? You want to use the tools you've learned, invested, and so on. So we're kind of focusing on that a lot more. And the two areas where we're focused on is graph and time series. We expect to have, initially it'll be a library based on Tinkerpop and Gremlin and so on. We will have a way to have, for you to program a graph onto graph APIs, and we will hide the Aerospike APIs underneath that. So if you're interested in graph applications and you're familiar with some of the existing standards, you'll be able to leverage that. Similarly, we will work on time series going forward. But graphs, something we're working on right now. You should expect something to come out either later this year or very early next year. In terms of the database as a service, this is something which, again, people have asked for. There is a lot of people who would love to use Aerospike in a self-service mode. Essentially, the ability of anybody to onboard themselves onto Aerospike needs to be simplified. This is part of some of the work we do with developers, but it's separate from that. So this is more operational, and this is something we are really focused on. Point-in-time recovery, I talked about Aerospike as a system of record. One of the things about a system of record is it is a single source of truth. And what you want to do is to be able to go back in time and essentially compare things which have happened in terms of compliance or auditing that you might have to do, but also in terms of restoring data back to some pristine state which might have been corrupted. I'm not talking about a failure of a data center or something like that. It's more like an application might have deleted the wrong data, and then you have to go back and restore it. And this kind of feature becomes really important for essentially implementing or using Aerospike as a system of record for more and more applications. It's not like we are not being used as a system of record today, but we are used probably for maybe 5 to 10% of where we can be used. And these are the kinds of features we're adding to enable that to happen. We continue to kind of focus on another side, which is the operational side, in terms of observability and management. Many of our customers, especially some of the large ones here, now have thousands of Aerospike nodes, dozens of clusters. So you get to the problem of having to manage all of this. In fact, PayPal is going to be talking in a meetup in the Bay Area, which I'm organizing next month, about how they have actually managed this by themselves. But I really want us at Aerospike to actually learn from that and build out these features so new customers and people like yourself don't have to invent it again. So that's kind of a huge focus for us in terms of observability and management. And I think that is kind of summarizes the roadmap. Feel free to kind of, come over and chat about things if you have questions, if you want more details. There is Zohar here. He's a Superman, as all of you know. So he will be able to also help you here. But we are also cloning him. So we're gonna, you're gonna have more Zohars around. In Israel. So we're investing a lot in our teams in Israel especially, but also, we will have more support for you. So feel free to come chat with me. Thanks.